Hello, welcome back to Human Design Book Club. We are so excited today to bring you Ra Uru Hu's Encounter with the Voice. Let's introduce ourselves. Jennifer,
Hey, everybody.
and we have Kayla,
Hello, Kayla, 1-3 emotional manifester. Happy to be here.
woo, and I'm Rebecca Anderson, Clinic Projector. We envision a world where everyone can live their truth, everyone can make decisions easily, people are safe to tell their story, people get to have fun together. Community supports us while giving us the freedom to explore our individual paths. This is a story of madness. So would anyone like to give the overview of what it is that we were reviewing today?
I can do it. So basically, we listened, this was more of a video book club than an actual book club, but we listened to Ra tell the story of his encounter of how he actually gained this knowledge of human design that he brought into the world. And so it is a very interesting story about when he was living in Ibiza and how he came home one night to his marina where he lived. He was very, very poor. And there was a light on under the door. He opened the door and his encounter happened. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
I love it how it just opens up with this phrase. It's a story of madness. I was already mad. I was living wild. I was very much alone in the process. I didn't even try to understand. It happened, or it started in January 3rd, 1987. As Kayla said, a arena in Ibiza, Spain. Single key. He had been doodling for years before he ever saw it, was the key to this arena. There's the light shining into the door, and it was an 8-day. Okay. Are you ready to work? It said. Sounded like a cigar smoking 155-year-old woman. It was an intense physical experience. And I'd love to hear what you guys thought about when he described this. He said no water in his body, no feeling of his skin, pain, except for when the voice communicated, no hunger, no thirst, no sleep.
Yeah, this had me thinking about how some people do different fasting before different experiences and things like that. I mean, when it came to learning about his experience, I've always been very interested in people that have like UFO experiences, angel experiences, Bigfoot experiences, like all the things. I love those kind of stories. And so when I heard his story, it has a lot of similarities to people who have had UFO experiences or experiences with lights and things like that. And so when it came to hearing his story, in the aspect of just looking at it as an experience, it was very easy to accept because I've heard so many stories like that. But when it comes to this is knowledge that now we're learning about and using in our lives, that's where I'm like, this is a little crazy. But it was, yeah, his whole experience was very bizarre. And we've been in human design for like what, 3 years now. And I had never realized the extent of the story, especially when it came to like other people being involved in his 8-day experience. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I love that you brought up, it kind of reminded you of other types of experiences. Because we were even talking last time we got together about biblical experiences. And if you think about how wild those are, and then Ra's story, they all go hand in hand from what I see. What about you, Jen?
Yeah, it reminded me, I was just listening this morning to something about A Course in Miracles, and that was very much channeled content by medical psychologists who actually really didn't get along until they were beginning to work together. but she had been psychic throughout her life, and she was like a tenured professor. I think it was Columbia, not positive, but she it reminded me of Ra, in that I suspect she had gate 43, because it was almost like, they say it was a voice, but it's like hearing without the voice. And it's the way they talk about that, is that acoustic inner ear. And it was for every day for 7 years, she was getting those messages. And I always think so much of this information is available in, not that A Course in Miracles is human design, but this like intense reservoir that can be tapped into by people that are ready or able to receive it. Because outside of this video, in other areas, when he talked about, he was referencing how he was living mad, like he had just walked away from everything. And even though he was a left brain body, which typically is not recommended for fasting, he's a calm determination, and he would go for long periods without eating. I think he got up to about 6 weeks at one point, and because he was tapping into that calm, and he was sure, so he was touching into the right kind of light and living with the light. And he talked about how he, aside from having the gate of shock and then all of his different drug experiences, he said a lot of times, and before he got to here, the drug experiences weren't so much about, let me take the trip. It was preparing the body to be able to handle the trip. And as I've read him in different iterations all throughout, and then rewatching this video, what I was hearing was, without even knowing it, he was preparing his body to be able to even channel what sounds really uncomfortable and painful and crazy and trippy. And then on top of that, being told to burn herbs. Who knew what in the world was in those? So I just, like, I could imagine if you put me in there, that would probably just crack my body right in half. But we can go through stages of preparation without even realizing what we're being prepared for.
Well, and it sounds like this light that gave him the information, that it had potentially traveled to him
Yeah.
from many different places. Like, very interesting.
Yeah. Like, it sounds, for someone who described himself as a quote, profound atheist, this sounds very mystical, not religious in the sense of there's a dogma, but certainly something profound and expansive and being guided and led. Like, that is way beyond, oh, shit happens. Like, there's just, there's something else going on here.
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday called The Union of the Unwanted, and they were talking about experiences, like not the specific one, but one person had brought up, I don't remember who it was, that he had a theory that when it comes to like these unexplainable experiences, they're kind of veiled by what you believe.
Mm.
So like I wonder if he was a Christian, if he would have saw this as angelic, but
Mm.
because he wasn't, it was more of just like a light, or someone who is more into like darker things, they might see something more as like a demon or things like that. So this kind of, the way we see the world is how we experience the supernatural. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at it too.
Yeah. Because you only have a certain language to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Really good point.
That makes sense. Yeah, so you mentioned the herbs, but there was also, he mentioned several times these ingredients that the boys told him to gather, and the Buddha shroud, the mask, the King James Version of the New Testament, Stanford biology textbook, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this one, Bhagavad Gita, and woven chessboard made of leather, copper wire, Majorca Daily Bulletin, and Theosophy Rate chart. So there were a lot of interesting ingredients that were included in this encounter. Did you
What
guys
is the
think of
Bog?
anything
What
about
is
this?
that second book? I have no idea what that is. Does anyone know what that is?
It's beautiful. Like, I want to say Hindu mysticism. Like at the core of it, like one of the subtitles is God speaks to Arjuna, because he is told it's about right action without attachment to the outcome. There's a war and he's called to fight, but it's actually some of his family members on the other side. So it's like this really high, I read it's probably been about 20 years, this beautiful high level discussion on correct action and principles. It's
Interesting.
beautiful. It is so mystical. It's like kind of like when you think about yogic traditions, like along that line.
Yeah, I've never heard of it. So when he was saying it, I was trying to like, and of course I'm never gonna spell that out, but like he's saying it, I'm like, I have no idea what that book is.
I was
So
surprised
that's
that it was in there
yeah, I'm like interest in the
because I had read
Bible
it and
and
I'm
then a
like,
biology textbook.
the biology kind of, because when you think about PHS and all that stuff, I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, that one I can kind of get because it does get into an incredible medical vein. But the Bhagavad Gita and then the New Testament, like you're into religion, like you're in a completely different world there.
this is really interesting. And when he was talking about how they could make it into a comedy, and he was joking about how he had like the shroud and the mask and the
Yeah.
herbs, and I'm like, that would be something
They
to
should.
see played out. Like, oh my goodness, yeah.
Oh my gosh, somebody totally should.
And
But
it's one
I,
thing.
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's one thing if this was like a presentation put on for the Englishman who comes. It's another that it began with this with just him. He's already in an altered state. He's already having these crazy communications, but yet to have to put on it reminded me of like going into ritual. You put on the robes and you do the incense or whatever the process is. It's one thing to do that for someone else to change people's consciousness and to tap into the subconscious. It was surprising to me that he was doing that when he was already going through all this crazy stuff and it was just him.
Yeah. And yeah, we can talk about those other people that were there. Like that was just so strange. The voice told them to, told him to invite them, but then told him to kick them out. So I don't know. Did you guys have any thoughts about those people?
I was like, I've never heard this part of the story. Like, where is this dude now? Does he have like a YouTube where he's like talking bad about human design? Like he sounds like he kind of went a little crazy in that like he had said you stole my ajna center or something. And when Ra's talking about after the encounter, he almost made it sound like that guy had carried the light and now Ra has it. So it's like maybe he couldn't do with it what he was supposed to. And then he also had mentioned that like there was someone in a different area of the world who had written stuff about the book of letters as well. And so it seems like this information was just kind of like in the consciousness field, and then whoever got it, and what they could do with it is just kind of what came of it.
But that guy had been institutionalized. That was the thing. And
Yeah.
that was someone from the US when he was on tour, came up to him and said, that's what he wrote in his journal. And I'm like, so you're right, it was floating around. The part about the whole Englishman and the mule and the gal, like of all of that insanity, the part that bothered me the most was it lied. Because when he was first there, that was his ray chart that was burned. When the guy first came and it's like, tell him these things. And one of them was that to come back that night and he will get the crystal he deserves. What did he get? Things were taken from him.
Maybe that's what he deserved.
But
Yeah,
he
and then
doesn't have a crystal. Like it's one
well,
thing to that's one thing to say you get a cracked crystal. It's another to say
yeah.
you don't get any. Yeah, or that part, and who knows? Like who
And then
knows?
that poem like totally creeped me out. And
Yeah,
you can actually go onto our Instagram and read all the lyrics. I just posted it, so it'll be back a little bit once this is posted. But it's a that like kind of creeped me out a little bit. But then
yeah.
it's kind of like what was that dude up to? You know, what was he doing? I have no idea. Very like a little bit
And
weird.
what did the woman think? Like
Yeah.
she's
He
sitting
must have
next
said
to
anything
an
about her.
insensate. Yeah, she's sitting next to an insensate dog, never says anything. She's watching all this craziness. Then all of a sudden, get out. The guy, the poor guy, just puking up a river. He gets dragged out on a carpet or a rug or whatever he was on, a blanket. And I'm like, this had to have just been the biggest thing of madness. Like, oh my gosh.
Oh, well, and when the guy first came, they were both in the mask with the stuff, and it's just like I'd like to hear this guy's story,
And I want to hear hers because she's
right?
watching all this and she's
This
not
is
saying that's enough for me. She's just sitting
yeah.
there. Like, what was in the room? Like, I wonder if the same kind of energy that dropped the dog and affected him so much. Like, I wonder if it was almost like stepping into like some sort of a magnetic field where you're there because you're supposed to be there, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah, that part was very odd, and I never heard about these other people before.
Yeah.
Well, the point where we were mentioning like this, the voice and the light may have been trying to get through in various ways to different people. Who knows what other experiences other people may have had, but they never actually took it and went anywhere with it? What if the voice had come across in several different ways to different people, and then like you had mentioned, Jen, Ra's particular body had been just the right receiver because he had built it up to be able to withstand it, and then just right place, right time to know what to do with it ultimately. And then maybe this other guy was part of that, you know, original path, but then just wasn't the right constitution for it or something. But it is really an interesting aspect of it.
Because at
Some of
one
the
point, that Englishman wanted to, he said he struck him violently. I don't know when that happened. That was at the footnotes kind of part after the main lecture. So I'm thinking, when did he come back again? Did he hit you when you saw him a few years later? Like, there had to have been something.
Oh yeah, because they were in contact for a while after that. Because at one point I was thinking, well, maybe this guy just disappeared, and you know, who knows?
Yeah.
And maybe he never figured out what happened to Ra. Maybe he has no idea human design exists. So there were some teachings in pulled out of this video: the rave cosmology story of the Big Bang, the mechanics, the crystals of consciousness, the nature of being. Would anyone like to touch on any of these?
I thought it was interesting that this is what he could hold.
Hmm.
Because so much of the rest of it, it was kind of like, it sounded like he was just engineered to be able to be a filter, a matrix for it to come up through. But these were the parts that it seemed like this is where we're going to go to school. And you're actually going to be a participant of this versus an unconscious channel of, you learn about it after it comes out of your mouth.
Yeah.
I do know outside of this video that at some point there has to have been, and maybe that's what he called the nature of being, that of all of it, the voice spent the most time on the building of the vehicle prenatally. He said compared to anything, those 10 stages that the body goes through as it's being built, that was what it spent the most time on. And I thought that's really interesting that that's what it wanted to get nailed in.
Yeah, I thought one thing that was kind of nice to hear was he talks about how this light has kind of been carried with him through his whole life, and he thought it would be until he died. And when we are thinking about like what information did the voice give him versus what did he figure out on his own, you can kind of come to the conclusion that I think if he had really veered off the path, the light would have corrected him. Like it seems like this consciousness was within him the whole time, is kind of what I gathered from it. So I feel like that kind of did validate a bit more about his path with this as he started to move beyond just the information he was given. I think that he would have been corrected if he was totally off course at some point during this. Yeah.
It's a lovely point because he talked in those footnotes, I didn't put it in here, but that he kind of thought of the light as kind of like a tag where you have an endangered species and you need to be able to find them. Oh, the wolf is in blah, blah, blah quadrant. And he just thought, I think I was tagged. But that's a really nice point because if it went so far as to pick the planets in the exalted and detriment of the Ray V Ching, there was it wasn't obviously just a floating light keeping him company. There was some kind of an interaction.
Yeah. And another thing that had me kind of laughing was he was talking about how like all the centers in his body were talking to him and they were like arguing over each other. And you could almost imagine how different all of the centers are and what energies they bring. That would totally be what it would be like if you could experience them individually.
And you could see too, probably where he was so strong on not self, because if he was listening to all that arguing and the back and forth, it's probably like an ego not self versus a solar plexus not self versus an ajna not self. And I thought that was something too. We had firsthand experience of the nonsense.
Good part of the animated movie as well. So what about this? The mule, an
It's an
extra
Englishman,
crystal.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't recognize that that was what it was called. What about the earth? Was there an earthquake? I don't remember that part.
That was from the Mallorca Daily Bulletin, the front page, when there was a crate that he had to stand up on a chair that the light was guiding him to, and there were like the butterfly wing components, and he had to pull it aside. That was that newspaper clipping of the front page, and that was Israel. I don't know the woman's name. She's the one that had the baby, but Israel Diaz's baby, unborn baby that was in the earthquake. So I infer that the Englishman had to have been in Mexico at some point, and that because otherwise I don't know how he would have picked it up. But that was kind of like the through line of this, is that extra crystal had been gestated, that woman was carrying that plus the baby, and it was bringing it from that location to Ra. It's crazy.
Very complicated. It just seems like a lot could go wrong in that plan, right? Like, what a wild like way to get there, right? And like how many things had to happen exactly the way they're supposed to for that, right? Like, what if the guy had never turned around and he just like went off, and then Roz at his encounter and he's like, I'm waiting for my light, and it's just sorry. Like, right, try again next century. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So just some of the themes we've already just been talking about on this slide: impregnated Ajna crystal, 3 lights shot into his body. Body graph center spoke to him from inside his own body. The neon light never left him, and even fixed the exalted and detriment planets for the Ravi Ching. So much going on.
Yeah, I wonder too, those 3 lights that shot into him, what was that about? He said he felt like it was what he imagined being literally shot would feel like. I'm like, what was that?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he said he
There's so
doesn't know if they ever left, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
some of them didn't.
He's got a lot of lights floating around.
He does, yes.
there's so many details that I don't even remember after watching it just a few days ago because there's so many parts to it. And on the topic of book club, he said the information came from the Book of Letters, which is the book that we just read last, the White Book. And the voice left when Ra followed instructions to stare into the sun. And he made a point that he was told to stare in the sun. He didn't want to because he was worried he'd go blind, but he ended up doing it. Didn't go blind, luckily. So,
And
as
that's
we've
when his dog
discussed,
came back.
yeah, crazy story. Yeah. So, what kind of final thoughts or pieces that, is there anything we didn't touch upon yet?
Well, he had contemplated that the Book of Letters is actually like the consciousness field in general. Like, I imagine almost like the Akashic records or something, right? Like all of this information that he just was able to somehow purely access from this voice encounter. Very interesting. I think that when you are interested in something like human design, taking the time to see where the information is actually coming from, because we can't all encounter the voice. You kind of have to filter through for yourself. And so learning this, I think, is valuable information when it comes to experimenting with the system.
I agree. Even though I appreciate knowing where it came from, some of all the details about the story are just kind of entertainment in a way for me at this point. And I'm just glad he took the information and shared it and that it's now available to us. Dan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I wonder, we talk about him having been prepared for it. I wonder if it had to be so extreme because maybe he was prone to extremes. Like in all of his teachings, he tended to be hyperbolic. Everything was so intense and it was so strong, and it was you would have to read him for it to get a more moderated viewpoint, because I don't know if he was just trying to get people's attention or that was his shock gate. But I wonder sometimes is if someone else had been available to receive it, if maybe there was a point where it could have been a beautiful, peaceful, spiritual experience. Maybe it takes grabbing him by the throat to get him to stop and pay attention. Because one of the things he talked about in the beginning of it was that as a manifester, if you tell him to do anything, he said, chances are I'll never listen to you again. And here he was obeying every single command of the voice, like a dog that was scared also. So I wonder if it just took this much to get through to him. Or maybe it was what it was. Who knows?
Well, it's definitely an interesting and entertaining in a way video. So again, like Kayla said, go to our Instagram and check it out. And we'll be back next time.
Bye, everybody.